Hi everyone, welcome to another Left Book Club event. My name's Neha, I'm a migrant rights activist, Palestine solidarity campaigner and teaching assistant from London, and I'm going to be chairing today's discussion. Today we're having what I'm sure you'll all agree is a very timely discussion about one of the most important books ever written about education, freedom and political consciousness. We're so honoured to be joined today by three incredible speakers representing an incredible range of political education initiatives. So a huge shout out to Left Book Club and to Elif for pulling this off. For those of you who don't know, the Left Book Club is a subscription book club and not-for-profit initiative. They seek to foster a spirit of collective learning and political education. They want to create spaces and avenues where people can learn from each other and discuss radical ideas that inform actions and practical steps. They aim to support the struggles that are fighting for us all. Their events feature speakers such as Angela Davis, Rachel Kushner, Kojo Karam, Lewis Gordon, Lola Olufemi, and Harsha Walia, and cover discussions from movement building and transnational freedom struggles to how to pitch a book to a radical publisher. During this event, please don't forget to ask your questions on the YouTube live stream chat. If you'd like to become a member of the Left Book Club, please visit leftbookclub.com. And don't forget to follow the Left Book Club on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're watching us tonight. Now, we're incredibly excited to announce this very timely discussion on, as I said before, one of the most important books ever written on education, freedom, and political consciousness. As our schools and education system here in the UK come under a sustained attack from government reforms and legislation, and the pandemic decimates our children's access to learning, we're here tonight to discuss the revolutionary potential of education. Paulo Freire's classic Pedagogy of the Oppressed contends that traditional teaching styles, what he calls the banking model of education, keep the poor and middle classes powerless and afraid of freedom by treating them as passive, silent recipients of knowledge from seemingly omnipotent teachers and educators. Grounded in Freire's own experience teaching Brazilian adults and his observations from the period in which he was in political exile, this pioneering book instead suggests that pedagogy should treat the learner as a co-creator of knowledge. He shows that through unity, cooperation, dialogue, and critical thinking, every human being can develop a sense of self and an analysis of the world around them, giving them the tools to organise for and achieve what he calls human liberation. We've got three fantastic speakers here today to discuss Freire's text. So first up, we've got Fabitz, who is a member of the landless workers movement in Brazil, one of the largest social movements in Latin America. Fabitz is part of the PPC, Political Pedagogical Coordination of the Florestan Fernandes National School, and member of the International Relations Collective and Political Education Sector of the MST. The MST's political education program is directly inspired by Freire's work and writings, so I'm really looking forward to hearing them speak about that. Next up, we've got Vic Chechi Ribeiro, who's a teacher, trade union rep, and anti-imperialist organizer. He is Manchester National Education Union's vice president and sits on the union's national executive. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Sarah Vowden, who is a steering group member of The World Transformed, which is a radical political education organisation in the UK. She was the arts coordinator for the World Transformed Festival in 2018 and continues to programme cultural content with the TWT Arts Working Group that experiments in pedagogical approaches. Sarah is also an independent researcher working across writing and film. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us today. And I'm going to ask you all to give some initial thoughts on the book and then some comments on how Freire's work relates to your own work and to the wider political situation in each of your home countries. I'm then going to take the opportunity to ask a couple of my own questions because I've got so much that I want to ask this incredible group of organisers. And then we'll move on to audience questions and comments, which you can submit throughout the event on the YouTube live stream chat, which is either on the left or right of your screens. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fabitz.
Hello, comrades. First of all, I'm sorry about my English. I hope you can understand me. And thanks for the invitation. And it's very important to share about our perspectives and see how important is Paulo Freire and in different contexts, in different regions, because we usually say that he is well known outside Brazil than in Brazil, because there's a systematic process of denying of Paulo Freire's in our country. No? So it's very important, and thank you for having this space to share. As part of the MST, we are an organization, a mass movement, big one. We have like 1.5 million people organized, and seems like a lot, but we're talking about Brazil, have a lot of people also. But we are a fraction of the Brazilian working class that struggles for land, for agrarian reform. And of course that we cannot advance on fighting for land if we do not have a program to what to do with that land. That's why we also struggle for agrarian reform. And of course, that will not advance on that if we do not change structurally the Brazilian society or the Brazilian political system. So it's a movement that connects the specific struggle for land with the necessity of structural change in Brazilian society. No? And Paulo Freire is part of the MST since its beginning, because the MST as a popular movement emerged at the end of the dictatorship in Brazil in the 80s. And also, it's the moment where we have the rise of peasant struggles in a context that's not only struggling for land, but struggling for democracy. And Paulo Freire was important in a sense that from all the pedagogical perspectives that we have in Brazil, it was the one that was more concrete for the peasants, because Paulo Freire starts reflecting on an emancipatory perspective of pedagogy, working with the peasants. So it's not for us of the MST only a theoretical or academic debate, but Paulo Freire is a concrete example of how a pedagogy that have class positions and class perspectives can really help in our struggle. Because when you're talking as a mass movement like MST, we are talking the necessity of each one of us be able to read the word. That's something that Paulo Freire says a lot. Now, how can we read the word, not only the words? No, so this is very important, because as a mass movement, we cannot depend only on the leadership or in a vertical structure. So we make a lot of things collective. When we're going to occupy a land to try to make a camp and try to conquer that land, to organize a production, we need to understand a lot of things. We need to understand politics. We need to understand how the judiciary system works in Brazil. And the pedagogy of Paulo Freire puts people not only as in a role of participation, but in a role of protagonism. That's what's very important for the struggle of the MST. So the people are not only participating in the struggle, they are protagonists. They're taking definitions. And the way Paulo Freire understand that we build knowledge is part of this. And also because we as MST, we gave a big focus on the importance of what we call political education. We call it in English political education. We have this other word in Latin language that is formação in Portuguese, formación in Spanish, or formación in French. But we use political education in English because don't have a translation. That is uh, studying must be connected on understanding the word, but understanding your role in this word. You know? That's why for us in the MST, the popular education and everything that Paulo Freire have contributed to it, it's not something that we choose. It's not like a trend that we like. It's a necessity of our struggle. We cannot organize a mass movement the size of the MST without this pedagogical approach. It's just impossible. So if we want to make it advance our struggle, a mass struggle, the way we do, we need Paulo Freire. There is no, it's not an option, it's a necessity. And this is very important, because when we struggle and when we achieve something, for example, we have a camp and became a settlement and we can produce, we are now connecting with a whole program That's not only having our private property of land, is how we are going to produce. So we need to talk about agroecology, which are the partners that we have outside the countryside, how we're going to connect with other sectors of society, how the achievements of the MST are part of the achievements of the whole Brazilian society. No? And Paulo Freire helped us a lot in the way that we can build things when we are together, when we have like an equal or in equilibrium the positions that we have. So that's the way we from MST can do a lot of things that were historically denied for the peasants. No, we can study, we can understand geopolitics, we can speak English. That's something that was denied for us. This kind of stuff. No? So Paulo Freire is part of the DNA of the MST, and in Latin America, of course, have this big impact. And this is the year. No, it's a special year for us because we'll be talking about Paulo Freire a lot during this whole year, and the and also just to close, there's something that's very important for us, the MST, when we're talking about Paulo Freire, that sometimes we face a problem in Latin America. I don't know if it's something exclusive from Brazil. If it is, you just can tell me. But we have some kind of vulgar approach of Paulo Freire's when we take off everything that's about politics in the pedagogical perspective that Paulo Freire presents, and we reduce Paulo Freire only to a methodological approach. And popular education is more than methodologies. It's about methods, about how we understand reality. It's about determinations, historical determinations. So we are always in the MST talking about Paulo Freire, but position ourselves, that Paulo Freire read a lot of Lenin, and it's talking about Lenin categories. Paulo Freire, it's discussing with Hegel in this book that we're talking about, the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So there's a political position, and we cannot reduce Paulo Freire only to the methodology or participatory or popular education. So one of our tasks is kind of honor the legacy of Paulo Freire in Brazil, making struggle with everything that we learn from him. I think let's give more time for the other points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabets, for sharing with us all of the amazing work that MST are doing, and in such an impressive environment as well in Brazil. I really love that image of recasting people as the protagonists of their own learning and in their own struggles. I thought that was really powerful. So thank you. Vic, is it all right if I pass over to you?
Yes, thanks. Thank you very much, Neha. Yeah, I'm really sort of honoured to sort of speak on one of my favourite books, sort of Pedagogy of the Press, and sort of speak around the impact of the book on myself, as well as how I've applied its, like Fabet's described, its methods. So to organising today, then what does it say around this sort of political moment today? So I first read Pedagogy of the Press when doing my teacher training sort of 5-6 years ago, and for me, it's the very first time that education was sort of posited as something that was transformative and around sort of liberation, sort of very much diametrically opposed to my own personal experience in schooling, which was very much the banking model of education. So for me, it's a really inspirational thing to read that. Another education system is possible, and then after that moment, as I became more politically active, understood sort of the world around me, that sort of society is defined by struggle, sort of understood and sort of started making the links between what was written in the book, Guide Education, actually understood that education isn't something that only happens in the classroom, in schools, but happens all over society today. So it's been really sort of valuable text, a revolutionary text for me in terms of understanding how to organise and to fight for a better society and well. So in terms of the sort of political projects that I'm involved in, I'm a school teacher myself, working in a secondary school, and you really see sort of firsthand the banking model of education. You see young people sort of viewed as being empty vessels that a teacher who knows everything sort of pours knowledge into. And the result of that is young people becoming quite passive, not understanding sort of the world around them, and there being a big disconnect between the struggle they see outside in their own lives regarding housing, poverty, etc., to what they experience and what they learn in school itself. And that carries on when they become older and go into workplaces where they're still passive. And instead of having a teacher, they have a line manager or a boss or a CEO, where that relationship is still the same. That absence of democracy is really corrosive in terms of our own struggles and our own potential liberation and transformation. So for me, as a school teacher, trying to apply Freire's principles around critical pedagogy, treating your classroom as something that is democratic, and it's absolutely right. Freire points towards that. We've got as much to learn as teachers from young people, students. We sort of see us as teacher students is sort of a term that he uses in the book, but also understanding concepts and principles around the fact that schools should have no exclusions policy. How can a school have an exclusion policy but commit itself towards sort of participatory principles, but also in terms of what we learn in schools as well. For me, a big sort of supporter in terms of I'm a science teacher, making links between science and society. Young people should understand that, for example, that scientific theories were used to justify imperialism and colonialism, and today the sort of the racism that exists today, linking those struggles in the community to what they learn around in subject areas, understanding calls for decolonizing the curriculum, which is linked around Freire's principles around an education system that liberates. They need to understand where they come from, what brings them there, and education system that is based around shared struggle, that's based around anti-imperialism, is one that's liberatory, and one that we should fight and struggle for. But on the other side, I'm also a trade union rep in my school, responsible for organising workers, and Freire's points around that, those in struggle should be the ones leading on it. You can absolutely apply to trade union organising. Myself as a union rep, it's not me on behalf of those workers, a passive relationship. Actually, those workers in my school are actively involved in their own struggle. We have regular union meetings, regularly meeting and discussing working conditions, particularly at the moment around COVID and health and safety. Developing the democratic capacities of those workers that I work alongside. So rather than me being a union rep, similar to our teacher is sort of one step away and removed, actually as the rep, I'm in struggle with those workers. And that's a really important thing to understand when it comes to rank and file organising, because what we desperately need in this country, in the UK, is a thriving rank and file movement where the workers understand they have their democratic capacities developed, that you've given them a taste of running their own workplace, and you've given them that glimpse of what an alternative to neoliberalism, what alternative capitalism looks like. And we socialism, workers' democracy, sort of things that Freire talks around education, the natural extension of that participatory education is workers' democracy, which is, Freire was a Marxist. Last speaker spoke around, mentioned Lenin and philosophy and things like that. So absolutely needs to sort of applied in there as well. And sort of another area that I'm sort of involved around outside my role as a trade union rep is being a socialist organiser in the city that I am in Manchester. Understanding around ideas around struggles, which Freire talks around struggle. Those in struggle should be leading on them. The need to join those struggles as much as possible. So, for example, the union group that I'm involved in across Manchester, we were the first of its kind in the country to pass a motion calling for no police in schools. And that's joining struggles between those anti-racist groups as well as those engaged in education workplaces. And similarly, we passed the motion of solidarity with tenants. So we do a lot of joint work with groups like ACORN and Greater Manchester Tenants Union, joining the struggle between the struggle for housing with the struggle for education. It's really important that those things are brought together. And once more, all of this as well, you're politicising those workers, so you understand that the struggle that they're in, they've got a sense of political agency, and the only way that they're going to transform that is by becoming the protagonist, but also, and quite key to this, is doing it collectively as well. And that sort of brings me on to the key point around the need for socialist organisation, sort of once more sort of building on Freire's principles around, once workers understand that struggle, once they understand to do it collectively, what form does that look like? And the need for organisation, be it a trade union group, be it, for example, if we take the UK, a local momentum group, for example, an organisation that coheres different parts of the class struggle in a way that allows those workers to reflect on those struggles, to learn from them, and to sort of collectively develop their organising methods is incredibly crucial. But also, once more, it's linked to Freire's principles around critical pedagogy. So, this book is absolutely transformative, radical, but it isn't just limited to what happens in schools and education system, but it's a guide to class struggle. It's a guide to liberation. It's a guide to a better world and a better society. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vic. That was, well, on a personal level, that was really exciting to hear about how you're trying to employ some of Freire's approaches in your classroom, or should I say science lab, in Manchester and in your union branch. Schools are obviously such a central part of local communities, and having workers' democracy among organised school staff kind of in solidarity with other sectors of society, as you were saying, clearly has the potential to be so transformative. Just a quick reminder to everyone who's listening to please pop your questions and comments in the YouTube comment box so that we can pass them on to our brilliant speakers after we've heard from Sarah. Over to you, Sarah.
Cool, thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting the World Transformed to come and speak on this amazing panel. So I'll just give you a bit of a background actually to what TWT is. So we're an annual festival of politics, arts and culture, and an all year round political education project. So TWT began in 2016, and it was very much a group of activists coming together from different parts of the left that were energised by the Corbyn leadership, and very much reacting to this kind of call for a new kind of politics. It was also kind of acknowledging that the terrain of political education had been very much hollowed out through neoliberalism in comparison to prior that, thriving working class institutions, social clubs, Labour parties, the distribution of radical pamphlets and consciousness raising groups. All of this has kind of been hollowed out since this kind of neoliberal turn. And the festival itself is a fringe event to the Labour Party conference, which runs between Liverpool and Brighton. And it really is about aiming to create a space where socialists and those also new to politics can come together, bring different parts of the left to engage in comradely debate, learn about radical ideas, Skillshare, and make connections to build what we want to see a stronger left. So the festival itself is now the largest political education event in the UK, which we're very proud of. And we normally have around 6,000 attendees with over 200 events over 4 days. So I can only describe it as a very immersive space where people can come and engage in a range of different pedagogical styles and approaches. That might be panel discussions, but it also might be strategy games, walking tours, film screenings, writing workshops. So kind of a bit of everything. And that kind of pluralism of ideas and formats is really important to the way that we approach political education and experiment with those different formats. I was talking last night to one of our organisers, and we were trying to think of what were the best way to actually sort of describe what TWT is about and give a kind of flavour of what the event feels like. And we were talking about one of our favourite evenings, which was in Brighton 2019. And in one evening we had the premiere of one of Ken Loach's films. We had Novara Media doing this really fun variety show. We had this internationalism event where we were sharing food and stories about political education. We had a class war strategy game, and then like a grime night. So that kind of gives a bit of a flavour to the kind of really immersive and kind of fun aspects of political education, which is also kind of really important for us. We want arts and culture to be central to the way that we approach political education. We often talk about collective joy as a kind of aesthetic experience that we want to emulate at the festival. And that's really important also for like creating the space for imagination and future thinking. So we're also sensitive to the way that we create these kind of different spaces of learning, and that, you know, there are often spaces that aren't directly facilitated. as also important sites of political discussion. That might be the dance floor or the queue to get coffee. And we really want to kind of create these spaces of people coming together and nurture conversation. So yeah, we're very experimental, I think, in our approach. We take risks, we try out new formats. Sometimes it doesn't work. We are constantly learning, and I think that's really important. Sometimes our ambitions don't always match the resources that we have, but we want to continue that ambitious work for the mass political education that we want to see. And I think also this process of reflection is actually really important when thinking about pedagogy of the oppressed, that it isn't just this intellectual endeavour of political education, but we also need that reflection both in our sessions, but also around what the kind of political education we want to see. And it's vital that we kind of create this culture of actually sharing among political education organisations so that we can really create a committed base of confident and politically conscious educators. So in that sense, like, TWT is very much a grassroots project. And I think what's interesting about it is that it didn't really come out of necessarily a group that would see themselves as professional political educators, but obviously began with a group of people that really believed in the need for popular political education, for a strong and committed left. And we very much learned along the way and developed that kind of intuitiveness around political education. And from my own experience, I can vouch for that TWT has been such a fundamental way in which my own political consciousness has developed. So yeah, one of those key principles as well is like collaboration. We're always working with other organisations, grassroots campaigns, MPs, trade unions, CLPs, and other political education organisations. And so the festival really becomes actually a big demonstration of all those kind of amazing skills and ideas and campaigns for imagining a new world. And it's important that we kind of, we share in the process of learning. How can we make emancipatory political education? So we need, a very broad political education. We need to think about it beyond the site of Westminster. We need to think about how systems of power operate in our lives at all levels, how it can exclude and oppress, but also how can we liberate us from the most marginalised from these forms of oppression. So we need to root our political education in justice. And also create and nurture accessible learning communities where we can develop our own political consciousness. So it's important that we also build Capitalism 101 skill-based courses to understand the political economy and capitalism more broadly. We've also kind of been engaging in various different projects over the last year, one including a research project with the Barry Amiel and Norman Melbourne Trust. And that's been a kind of process of actually mapping the terrain of political education across the UK. So we can research and look specifically on a kind of more micro level about what makes political education emancipatory and transformative, and how we can get there collectively. And then since 2018, we've also developed this amazing network of transformed groups. And this has been now over 30 groups across the UK that have all kind of developed autonomously and set up their own kind of mini versions of TWT. And this is really, really important to our approach so that we can have confident and skilled educators in local communities delivering education all year round. We also have a resource hub where we post loads of those kind of skill-based workshop templates, and that's kind of a way of skilling up this kind of amazing network that's developing of political educators. And this year we ran our first online event, which was kind of a new thing for us. It was a kind of, a good learning curve in terms of how we can kind of translate the festival into a kind of digital space. So we ran over 100 events over September, and was a really good opportunity, I think, to kind of develop what transformative political education can look like online, and how we can create that sense of togetherness in those kind of online spaces, and ways that we can make it more accessible. So I'll end there as a bit of an overview of TWT. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. As a keen attender of TWT myself, it was great to hear a little bit about kind of the thought that goes into it. So I'm going to take the opportunity now, if it's all right, to ask a couple of my own questions before we move on to the audience questions. And my first one is for Fabitz, if that's all right. I was just wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit more about MST's schools. I know that you've set up a number of public schools in encampments across Brazil and trained a huge number of educators to deliver quite a kind of tailored, specialized curriculum. I think I speak for everyone when I say we'd all really love to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. In summarizing a lot, of course, no, but we have like kind of two types of schools in our territories, and this word would be important: territories of the MST. No, one is more like the formal educational system of Brazil. No, like we are part of a municipality, our territories, when we have, for example, a settlement, and then we have the right to have a school there. So the state must pay teachers and create the infrastructure because it's like a public school in our territory. And this is not like the big problem. The big problem is that when we say state, you have to give the school, and then we say, but we want to run the school the way we believe it must be run. And then we create a conflict with the state in different political public policies. So we have schools where people, it's like the formal grades of the public system. And then we have different levels of how can we control with our own professors, with our own methodology, with our own approach. Um, it's more linked to the bancary system in a way. So it's where we are confronting the bancary system, because the bancary system is not a teacher sitting telling people things. The bancary system is a system that connects institutionality, economy, how relations of power is organized. That's what Paulo Freire is talking about. So we have this kind of schools, and we have thousands of these schools. We are a big movement. Brazil is a big place, and we have different levels of how can we truly control the process in these schools that we have. And in the last 10 years, the governments, the different governments, left, right, everyone, they just closed, in the last 10 years, they closed something like 1,200 of these schools, because the idea is move people to study in the urban centers and not because it's too expensive. It's easier to pay a bus to pick up the kids, the people, and go to the city. So this is one way we have. The other way we have in our schools is what we call the political education schools of the MST, where we have more autonomy to exercise fully our comprehension of political educations and how we apply our pedagogical perspectives. But in both of these schools, in both of the systems that MST organize in our territories, because when we talk about territories, we're not talking about a piece of land. This is private property. This is property, a piece of land. We in MST, we fight a lot to not have the title of property, and the government refuses. They want to give us the property. We don't want. No, we just want to use that because it's a common land. But and as territory is not a piece of land. Territory is where we reproduce ourselves. It's where we have our human relations, as where we have our culture, where we have all the dimensions. So it's key for us in the different schools that we have, both the more educational schools and more the political education schools, is that we must take in account two things. First, people are different and people are diverse. One of the problems of the capitalist system is that we confuse diverse and different with inequality. It's another problem. People are diverse, people are different. And as people are diverse and different, people learn and teach in different ways. So what we try to do in our schools is how we exercise the different dimensions that we as human beings summarize inside of us. So there's moment of class, of content, but in the same school, we have a moment to work, because work's part of our education process. We have to work, we have to produce. And then we have to have arts and culture, because this is part of us. This is a pedagogical tool. And then we need to talk about the socialist values. And we need what we call organicidade in Portuguese, that we have to organize ourselves. So these different dimensions is part of the education process. So you do not spend the whole day in the classroom. You have part of your day in a classroom because you have to transform information in knowledge. That's part of the process. But you have to work, you have to study, you have to know about culture, you have to exercise arts. So we try to fit during a day in a school that people go through all these dimensions, and this creates identity, a common identity. Because as people are diverse, sometimes we make a course, political course, and at the end we make this evaluation, and sometimes we go very methodologically. We just put like colored papers and make dynamics and things like that. And some people just say, I love the class, that's the best part of the course. And other people say, I just love the cultural nights. I learn more in the cultural nights than in any of the class. And others say, I just learn more about agroecology, and I just learn more. The course was great in production, for example. So people learn different. This diversity we try to guarantee. And all this only makes sense for us if it's connected to a political strategy of our organization. We are organizing people for something, for the struggle, and not just to know more, to be more intellectual, to speak English, I can talk, but to change reality. So the connection between what we understand as of Paulo Freire's thought is the connection with a strategy and a class strategy, and that's what we try to do. I don't know if it's a good answer, but I try to summarize a lot the perspectives that we have in our thousands of schools that we have in Brazilian territory.
Thank you. That was a brilliant answer. And I really like that kind of thing that you said at the end about the practice of encompassing all the different dimensions that make up personal identities, but then bringing it all back to socialist values and class struggle to really cement that sense of collectivism and unity is absolutely crucial. So thank you. All right, I'm gonna ask Vic a question, if that's all right, Vic. I wanted to ask you in particular about the recent government legislation that bans anti-capitalist material from being discussed in English classrooms. And maybe if you've got time to add a little bit, just about how that kind of policing and education ties into your wider No Police in Schools campaign. Thanks.
Yeah. Good question. No, it's a very deliberate and conscious attempt by the government to curtail anti-capitalist teaching, which, let's remember, is in response to a widening of political consciousness and mass protests from working class people across different communities in the summer, demanding racial justice. So this move by the government is aimed to stop that. Is to stop and prevent ideas. And if we just sort of take a step back and sort of go back to history, if we sort of think back to sort of more colonial times, education was massively repressed in colonial times. So my family's ancestry is in the Indian subcontinent, and when the British left, literacy in the subcontinent was around 13%. That's very deliberate in terms of that ruling class understood that education was key to workers understanding the struggle around them and be able to put those struggles together and actually to resist that. So the move to sort of limit radical teaching in schools is one, aim to prevent those ideas being populated amongst young people who, let's remember, face are facing declining living standards, as well as sort of more oppressive sort of border regimes, as well as the impending crisis from climate as well. So that's a sort of move to sort of limit that consciousness. But also, it's a move to sort of to limit radical teachers in school. Now, it's sort of a challenge to radical teachers who want alternatives to a banking model and want to teach critical pedagogy, want to link what happens in the classroom to wider society. It's a challenge to them, and it's really important that those education workers do collectivise. We are collectivising around this to sort of resist what's being proposed by the government wholeheartedly. But also, you've got to consider that as part of a wider attack on free speech in education as well. We see things, for example, the Prevent agenda, particularly radical teachers who are from racialised groups, as well as students from those backgrounds as well. And part of that sort of wider securitisation in education is also around an increasing police presence in schools, particularly in cities like London and my own in Manchester. So, for example, the Mayor Andy Burnham is planning to install 20 across the region, a move resisted bitterly by ourselves as the trade union and workers. And what's interesting is sort of speaking to workers around why we don't need police officers based in schools. It sort of leads on to sort of more wider abolitionist arguments that what education is for. Actually, no, the young people that we share a space with, they aren't an obstacle. They aren't there to be policed. Actually, we're there to learn from them, which once more it links back to Freire's principles around teacher-students not being separate, but you have teacher-students, you've got student-teachers. So as ever, it's up to workers to struggle, and that struggle is existing, but it's important that we educate and we agitate around them to build the sort of education system that we need.
Thanks, Vic. That was a fantastic overview. And I'm really glad that you mentioned prevent, which I think is fair to say is probably the biggest threat to freedom of expression, not only in education, but across the public sector. Okay, I'm going to switch over and ask some of the questions that are coming up in the Q&A. So I think this one is a great question. Someone asks, there are so few public spaces for conversation these days, both by design and otherwise. It's fantastic to hear about the festival and TWT, but they ask, how are you managing during lockdown to create and or keep those spaces?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously we put everything online this year, and everything that we've been doing has been digital. So we kind of used lots of different methods. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we captured still was the more spontaneous discussion that comes at the event. So we created like an online forum, and that meant that we would start conversations in sessions, but there was also then a space for each session to have a digital space that we could continue those discussions, and those conversations have kind of continued afterwards. We've also, we still managed to kind of do a lot of like participatory formats, I think, in the way that obviously, in Zoom that you can kind of create breakout rooms. There's still, and is having kind of active facilitators in those to really create these kind of moments of being able to kind of come together and meet new people and feel like comfortable and confident in sharing in those spaces. We obviously, the kind of the meeting together and the kind of the arts and cultural side was a really hard challenge. But we still managed to do, for example, a great poetry night, a great cabaret night, where we also had different speakers, and that was in support of Swarm. So I think it's about kind of being as creative as possible, analysing kind of how these events are working online, and just making things kind of fun and participatory as much as possible, to kind of avoid that Zoom fatigue that we all know of. But I think kind of continuing that experimentation. We also did, I was part of a group this year that we tested out what a consciousness raising group would look like over lockdown, and we wrote a report, and that's on our resource hub, and that was a really interesting experiment and actually worked really, really well to do online. So I'd encourage you, anyone who's interested, to have a look at that on our website. But there are definitely modes of coming together. I think it's more about, learning the lessons. Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a great start of actually what makes things emancipatory doesn't necessarily kind of stop it on the digital space. It's much more about kind of the methodologies and the space that you're creating, the space of care and the space of trust, I think, are really, really important. And I don't think that's lost in a digital space.
Great, thank you. Do either of the other speakers have any thoughts to offer on that question, in terms of how to move public space onto Zoom, basically?
I think
just for bench briefly, so one of my roles is I'm on the Union's National Executive for Black members. So we use the term Black politically to encompass all those who are racialised. So we've put together an online political education programme that sort of aim to sort of raise sort of the consciousness of those members in the union. So, we did an event last Friday on Prevent, something I mentioned before, and sort of looking to do further events throughout the year on imperialism, around building international solidarity. So I think if you can come up with themes, so rather than sort of, if you're planning sort of an online event that you might normally do in workplaces or anything like that, is to think of themes. So rather than them being sort of individual and isolated, actually they sort of feed into each other. So the things we've sort of identified is around, like I mentioned, around political education, around training for reps as well, developing our union reps into organisers. You can do that online, as well as sort of that sort of wider work that we're doing around whole worker organising. So linking in community struggles on migrant rights, deportation, housing, exclusions to what's happening in education as well.
Great, thank you. Fabitz, were you about to say something?
Yeah, no, just say that I think we have to balance what we can exercise in a way to be creative, what we can do online, but at the same time, understand that there are some things that we just can't do online. Because when you're talking about the process of Paulo Freire and the way he perceives how we build knowledge, it's a process of humanization of the people. And you cannot humanize ourselves without touching ourselves, feeling ourselves, without exchanging in different ways. So it's a difficult process of balancing expectations that we have. So I think we in the MST, we are facing this, but we have a different context because we have communities. We are not like kind of isolated individually, in different territories. But it's been challenging, because the tendency is that we go to a formalism that is just a reproduction of the bancary system, but online, And so I think it's challenging. We have to think more methodologically in this, and I think it's a challenge, and we are learning a lot from every Zoom session like this, how all people have a diversity of experience, and that's amazing.
Amazing, thank you. All right, this one is, I'm going to amalgamate two questions for you, Sarah, if that's okay. The first one's really lovely. Someone's asking if you can elaborate on what you mean by collective joy. And then the second one, which I think is related, is someone would like to hear more about your research on political education as emancipatory, and ask if there are any links to that education.
Yeah, so collective joy. So that's kind of a term that's very much developed in one of the things that we've always had at the festival, which is in collaboration with the ACFM crew, Navarra Media. So we have these, something came out of Corbynism, which is called acid Corbynism, which was really a way of bringing in these kind of cultural perspectives and the kind of conscious raising methods, and to kind of bring in this into our political education. So we talk about collective joy as really that moment of I suppose in a way of also the solidarity, of kind of coming together, those kind of spontaneous, joyous moments that are really, really important for strengthening the movement in general. And that's, so some of the events that we've done on those kind of evenings where we've really centered and tried to think about collective joy has been doing these kind of big conscious group raising sessions, so being in little groups, also doing collective listening sessions, so that's sitting all together listening to music and having that collective experience, having talks on things like rave culture and how that also relates to kind of policy and things like this. So we talk about it a lot as a really foundational principle of the joyous stuff that happens quite spontaneously in political education. The other one was about research and the emancipatory, some of the what came out of the research about emancipatory political education. I think that's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And also if there is anywhere they can find a link to that research.
Yeah, so we haven't actually, the research is about to be published, but it isn't quite finished yet. So I'm talking about it from looking at it before that. But yeah, I think one of the interesting things that came out of some of the defining principles was stuff around actually like facilitation, for example, like the need to really to relate to identities and relate to the facilitator. Because obviously, you know, and this is also comes in Pedagogy Oppressed, is like, you know, the facilitator, the educator is also not neutral. And that we need to create a culture of like building trust in these spaces. And that's actually a really kind of foundational principle. And I think that's something that we can kind of further look into. Also in terms of, you know, in terms of that kind of need to see yourself within kind of and make connection with that facilitator. Also the need for us to kind of maybe continue the work and seek other groups that might not be traditionally in the left. You know, there's lots of political education work that happens outside of left spaces that wouldn't traditionally be known as political education. And actually, I think we need to start approaching and politicizing these kind of projects that wouldn't see themselves as political educators. I think the arts is a really good example of that, where they're doing a lot of political education work, but they wouldn't describe that. And I think these kind of the lessons and these kind of new spaces that we need to reach out are really important. So I think that's going to be a kind of key practices in improving that.
Thanks. That was a really great answer. All right, Vic, someone has put a comment in and then someone else has asked a question, but I think they go quite well together. So someone says, schools can be transformative, however, they are designed to produce a workforce and social classes. They are not designed to challenge capitalism. And then the question that I think comes really nicely off the back of that is, do you think it's possible to transform the curriculum without tackling the very structure of education and schools?
Yeah, really important question. It sort of really links into the work around decolonising the curriculum. So that's workers, you know, taking ownership of what they teach, but doing it in a collective way and understanding why it needs to be changed as well. So I'll sort of see that the two go in hand to hand, really. And sort of Fred, he touches upon this in the book. There's almost sort of inside and outside the system he sort of proposes regarding what educators can do individually in terms of their own teaching practice within their own school, within their own sort of locality. But that's got to run alongside a more wider political project in terms of state power, in terms of, you know, transforming what education looks like nationally as well, because no, education isn't politically objective. As the question suggested, education is really key in capitalism to reproducing huge class and racial inequalities, and you know, key and central to that is the banking model. There's no coincidence that Ofsted pushed the banking model. You know, that's been really reflected over the last couple of years with a real focus on curriculum. No, before that, the curriculum changes in 2010, led by Michael Gove, removing coursework and focusing on high stakes testing is designed to encourage a banking model of education. Now, even for example, in science, they've got rid of coursework and instead you have to memorize 20 different formulas by rote. There's no actual critical thinking involved in that, but once more, it's encouraging a passive relationship in classrooms. So the challenge is, what can you do as a teacher operating within a capitalist education system? And for me, it's around popularizing what an alternative is, working and speaking to workers, speaking to parents and communities around what that alternative looks like, and building that. But like I said, that's alongside that, there needs to be sort of a rank and file socialist movement that exists and transcends education to wider society to sketch out what a socialist education system looks like.
Great, thank you. That's all really important. Okay, right, one more question. Someone's asked, and I think this is for all of you, are those who have experienced injustice most qualified to teach such that that injustice isn't reproduced? Sorry, that was slightly confusingly worded.
Yeah, I'll go first. Shall I go first? Yeah. I think, yes, it's sort of an important question, really. And it's one that sort of you come across, for example, so for example, I'm a member of a tenants union, and it's really important that those people who are experiencing those struggles are the ones leading it. But also sort of looking at sort of different sort of areas. So for example, around anti-racist organising, it's important that those who are racialised are given the platform to sort of share and give those ideas. But however, it is important that you are building the widest possible class unity as well. So when it sort of comes to who leads struggles, you've got to create an inclusive space, but one that's based on the widest possible unity as well. And sort of in sort of pedagogy, the oppressed, it sort of touched upon that. The idea that the teacher student may not be the one in that struggle, but they're creating an environment where those who are oppressed, you're giving them the tools to understand their oppression, so they're the ones that can take a step forward and lead that struggle alongside of you. So rather than sort of seeing as who's leading what, it's comrades in struggle together, fighting for liberation.
Brilliant. Fabitz, did you have anything to add on that?
I think everybody has something to teach and something to learn, and you can only teach when you learn, and you can only learn when you teach something. That's like one of the things that Paulo Freire say, and everybody is in one way or other in one struggle. Sometimes we are more organized collectively, but we are always struggle against the system in different levels, in different ways. So we are all kind of victims in different levels of the process of dehumanization that the capitalist system creates. The way we organize in front of us, it's very diverse. We have different experiences in different parts. So I think everybody can contribute. Just because the pedagogy of oppress is not like a manual of how we do things. It's more that this reflection of what are the starting points to think an emancipatory education. So what we have to take on count when you think about emancipation in a pedagogical perspective. So I think that if we're going to see how this operates in the land struggle in Brazil, of course that the landless people in Brazil will have a different level of contribution in a collective process. But the landless people in Brazil are a small fraction of the working class. So the way we can connect these different struggles is not like that, oh, we have the people suffering injustice and struggling, and then we have a lot of people that are not just watching, or they're not. It's like the same thing that the capitalist system do very well, of convincing a lot of people that they are not working class, because working class is just that kind of that other sector of society. So I think that it's important that we can teach about our struggles, but we can only emancipate ourselves about our own struggles when we learn from outside our box. For example, land struggle in Brazil, with what we do as MST, we cannot think in land struggle without thinking all the environmental issues that's related with how we produce agriculture in Brazil. We have to connect to other, and everybody have something to add in this process. I don't think we have people who can add more or add less, as long as we can connect and see a class perspective that unify our diversity.
Thank you. I think something that's come up there, and actually in all of your contributions, is the centrality of solidarity to any kind of revolutionary pedagogy. Would you guys be able to tell us a little bit more about how you conceive of that relationship between solidarity and revolutionary pedagogy? And have you got any examples that you could share of how this has been done particularly well? Could we start with Sarah, if that's all right? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll share an example that I think is also relevant from the previous question as well, in that one of a recent project that we've done with TWT, but also, and this has been led by trans comrades, also in Momentum and the Labour campaign for trans rights, has been a trans political education programme that's been happening over the last few months. And that's been a really, really important intervention in acknowledging an issue that unfortunately has become very divisive, and acknowledging that we need to ensure that we're, trans liberation is at the centre of of our socialist struggles, and that it is central to our working class consciousness and other struggles. We need to relate it to healthcare, to housing, and so that's kind of a really, I think, a good example of the way that we can create solidarity. And it's also been great in the way of creating resources for trans allies as well, and how we can kind of help intervene in situations, and also learn from these kind of experiences. And I think in that sense, these kind of, these political education programs that are directly intervening in these kind of issues that become particularly divisive on the left, I think is really, really important for building that solidarity, and ensuring that it's led by our trans comrades.
Brilliant, thanks. Vic, could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think sort of start off with saying, what is solidarity? And for me, it's this concept and idea that our struggles are shared, and the only way that we're going to liberate ourselves is by working together. So, as a radical teacher who believes in radical pedagogy, revolutionary pedagogy, it's around finding a way to unite those struggles as much as possible. So those people they understand what that shared struggle is and why is it a shared struggle. So for example, within my union, we've done workplace meetings for education workers on things like housing. So understanding that housing impacts workers, because increasingly, for example, young education workers are paying increasing amounts of rent to landlords, are living further and further away from schools and the communities that they're a part of, but also impacts the students in schools as well, in terms of young people, for example, living in increasingly poor housing, and during the pandemic, increasing numbers facing evictions as well. So understanding the struggle in the community regarding child poverty is linked to the struggle for decent housing as well, which is linked to the struggle against the economic system, which is also linked to the struggle for migrant rights as well. And it's up to us as workers engaging in critical pedagogy, developing a sense of co-teaching and co-organising that, and then we really sort of bring that to the fore as well. But similarly, and sort of another example is around the No Police in Schools campaign that we ran. Running alongside that was anti-racist training that myself and other education workers in our school delivered to our colleagues. It wasn't someone external doing it, it was someone that from the science department, from maths, for example. And part of that training spoke about imperialism, it talked about colonialism, and sort of put into the context around Black Lives Matter and hyper-policing as well. And it's so powerful having that political education, anti-racist education coming from people you work with, you trust. And for me, that's a real effective way of sort of organising against racism and the far right is that sort of worker-led political education that is mentioned really clearly in Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Brilliant, thank you. Felix?
So I can give you two examples of how the importance that this kind of radical and revolutionary pedagogy can create solidarity. One is the way we organize, for example, Via Campesina. That's a big network of different peasant organizations around the world. In Latin America, after the dictatorships and after the peace agreements in Central America in the 90s, we peasants were more able to go from here and there and try to connect with people. And using the pedagogy, the revolutionary pedagogy, where people start to understanding their own realities, and sharing these methodologies and doing exercise together, we start realizing that even if we are so different, we have different cultures, we speak different languages, it's the same fucking mega company that's in our territories. It's Monsanto here in Brazil and in Argentina and in Chile and in Nicaragua. So the process of the way we organize people, understanding their surroundings, and that's why this kind of pedagogy is very useful, connect us in a level that we could not do if you're talking about language, or if you're talking about the way the indigenous people in one place and the peasants in another do. So this is a potential that was very important. Today is one of the networks, and we create solidarity in a way that, well, if we want to attack Monsanto, we are going to attack everybody in the same day, and this have a better effect than Brazil doing on one day and other people. So it helped us also to have, in a class perspective, common targets. So this kind of pedagogy that helped us to understand that we have a lot of in common. The second example that I can give from our experience, is a process that we start like in 2015, 15, 10 plus 5 is 15 in English, no, 15. And we have this experience of the Florestan Fernandes National School, and part of our activities is open for people from different parts of Latin America, and not worldwide, because we just don't have people who can freely give classes and speaks, I don't know, English or French. It's very difficult to find this in Brazil. And we just make an exercise, and we start to opening and bringing people from different parts of the world. It's a mess in a pedagogical and a methodological perspective. We're just learning everything. We're confused, we're experimenting, a lot of things going wrong. But then after this process, we were invited for comrades from South Africa. We want to build a school here also. What can we reflect about this pedagogy together? And then we go to Tunisia, and then now we have a school in Tunisia, and then we have the comrades from the Popular Education Project in the United States, and we have the Mariátegui schools in Argentina, and now we have in Nepal, we have the Communist Party of Nepal have a political education school where we're discussing these kind of things. So now we have like 12 different schools of political education of different organizations, that what we share in common is the understanding that we need this kind of revolutionary pedagogy, and we need this kind of approach to build class struggle. We have a lot of difference within us, but we have this common understanding that all these 12 schools that I'm talking are using this approach of pedagogy to do. So I think it's not how this revolutionary pedagogy creates or no solidarity. Solidarity is a consequence of putting on practice the process of humanization. That is how we approach learning and teaching in a working class perspective, I think.
Thank you so much, Fabets. I love that. That solidarity as a consequence. I think that's fantastic. All right, so we're going to do 2 more questions, I think. So the first one is for Vic. So someone says, you mentioned that you first read Pedagogy of the Oppressed while doing your teacher training. In your experience, do you think the current system of teacher training in the UK upholds or challenges Freire's banking model? If it's the former, what would you like to see change?
Yeah, thank you. So I went to Goldsmiths University for my teacher training, which was quite a progressive place to do it, and it was really clear that they put forward different models of education, including learning models, including sort of looking at critical pedagogy, as described by Freire, as well as the sort of traditional banking model. So I sort of explained those differences and sort of sat it within its political context as well, which is incredibly useful for me. However, that may not be the case at other universities, but also I think increasingly so. We've sort of seen the development of programs like Teach First, which is based on, I think, Teach for America or something. And that was a very deliberate thing to do by the government, which was aimed at sort of cutting the influence of initial teacher training at universities, which they sort of saw as developing left-wing teachers, and there's a very political attack. And also, if you coupled it at the same time, the government introduced tuition fees, 9,000 tuition fees to train as a teacher in a sector that is massively under-recruited as well. So the choice was you could do teacher training, which has all the ideology, gets saddled with loads of debt, or you could do Teach First and you get paid a salary. And alongside that, you also have teacher training on the job, which is sort of very much sort of de-intellectualizing, putting forward this idea that you could learn teaching pedagogy on the job, which is quite insulting for a profession that is so important ideologically in terms of our liberation, which is sort of what's described in Pedagogy off the press. So for me, we really sort of uphold the needs and really put forward the need for teacher training to include texts like Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and that should sit within within universities. Amongst many things I want to abolish, so Ofsted, Prevent, Teach First, capitalism. These are the things that we need to sort of get rid of and actually move towards an education system that values learning, it values genuine teachers, that values those students, rather than seeing teachers as grades, as numbers, as bits on league tables, as data. no, that's been commodified. Actually, we value young people as the young people, the next generation that are going to transform society, which is what we as socialists believe what should be all about.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to ask our last question, which is a really nice one. I say, having come up with it myself. And then we're going to end there, I think. So last question is, what do you guys recommend reading? In particular, authors who have written on Freire. So I recently read some Ira Shaw, which I found really helpful for kind of practical everyday strategies to implement in my classroom. But who else should we be reading? Sarah, do you maybe want to?
I mean, I've always enjoyed reading bell hooks and Audre Lorde in relation to Freire's work, and I think there are so many kind of echoes of that. So I would always go for those classics.
Brilliant, thanks. What about you, Vic?
Yeah, so I've got this book recently. So it's called The Student Guide to Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And that sort of goes through sort of practical elements and ways it's been utilised. But on the Tricontinental website, which includes one of my heroes, Vijay Prashad, there's a really in-depth look at how Freire's been applied in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, particularly looking at it in schools as well as particularly looking at developing that sort of revolutionary consciousness amongst the workers in struggle in that country. And it's all very much sort of linked to a lot what Fabetz has been saying in terms of what he's been doing in Brazil. So yeah, those would be my recommendations.
Fantastic, thank you. And Fabetz?
That's so great to listen of Vijay's. Vijay, we were just in a meeting this morning, and we are just trying, for example, as an example, we are trying to make a worldwide group to read The Capital and try to connect with our reality in all this discussion that we're having. We'll start this initiative with Vijay and other comers from the Tricontinental Institute. What I will recommend also for people to read is, I don't know if you have an English version of Pedagogy, how you would translate Pedagogy of the Autonomy. Pedagogy of Autonomy. It's another book from Paulo Freire. It was like the last thing he writes before he dies in 1996. And it's a book that's directed to those who teach. Of course, the first thing he will say in the book that there is not those who teach or those who learn, but he's just telling to those who are a part of the process of educating someone, what we have to have on mind. How can we operate to give autonomy to people and build autonomy? This is a book from 1996. I don't know if we have in English, but I'm sure that you have in Castellan and Spanish. But it's a very good, if you don't have, just find a way to translate it, because it's a very important book, and I think that we could learn a lot, because it's kind of his final reflections on the tasks that we still have to not reduce his pedagogy or the popular education to a bunch of methodologies and give this political sense to it. That's my recommendation. My recommendation, I don't know if it's in English, but okay.
That's right. All right. Your recommendation is that I learn Castilian and then translate that book, which I'm going to get off and do right now. Actually, when you mentioned autonomy, I think another kind of related and very good writer who writes on education and freedom and autonomy is Abdullah Öcalan. Volume 3 of his Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization is called Sociology of Freedom, published by PM Press, I think, which draws on a lot of those concepts in a really meaningful way. All right, thank you guys so much. It's been such a gift to be under the same virtual roof as all of you and to have this discussion, which I think is definitely going to stay with me for a really long time. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Please visit the Left Book Club website, which is www.leftbookclub.com if you want to become a member. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And just to remind you all to tune in next Thursday, the 11th of February, to the next session of the Left Book Club's Anti-Capitalism series on anti-capitalism and love with Gargi Bhattacharya, Sophie K. Rosa, and Joshua Virasamy. The Eventbrite link has been posted in the YouTube chat. Once again, just want to say thank you to all our speakers and to everyone who's participated in the discussion or asked a question. What better way to put free air's advice into practice by becoming co-creators of this wonderful conversation. Take care, everyone, and see you all later. Bye.